This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Well, hey now, and welcome to another exciting episode of Uncorking a Story. I'm Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on another exciting episode. I want to remind you to please follow Uncorking a Story on all social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can find us at Uncorking a Story on all of those platforms. And just a very quick note on YouTube, that platform has been a fantastic growth vehicle for the show, especially since we've upped the video quality. It's become also a very fun way for me to interact with all of you because it's the one platform where people can leave comments while they're listening. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel by searching for Uncorking a Story on YouTube and hitting subscribe. For you audio listeners out there, please subscribe, rate, and review Uncorking a Story wherever you get your podcast. All right. Today we are talking with Justin Woodbury, and this is another episode where we really uncover the importance of intent in writing. And for those of you who have listened to the last few episodes, particularly the one that I just released with Chrissy Holm, you've been hearing me talk about the importance of focusing the intent behind your writing. Now, Justin is going to share his story with us in a moment. To give you a little bit of a preview, he is a male survivor of sexual abuse from an adult woman. And this abuse was shoved under the rug by his pastor, who was more worried about saving his own reputation and that of his independent Baptist church, rather than helping a young boy address the trauma that he had experienced by the hands of a 30-plus-year-old woman. When you think about it, Justin had every right to seethe and write his memoir with the intent of outing everybody who had done him wrong. You know, kind of almost like I don't want to belittle it, but like a Taylor Swift song, you know, like a revenge song. This could have been a revenge memoir. And that was actually his intent when he started to write the book. But something changed within him early on in the writing process. As he started to write, his intention changed from venting his anger to using this book as a tool to help other victims of child sexual abuse. And when he made that change, as he will explain in this interview, the book became easier to write on a number of different levels. So, as writers, when your intentions are rooted in something positive rather than something negative, you will find that your writing will get easier. Now, I can't even imagine the pain that Justin had to re-experience as he was writing the chapters, recalling the sexual abuse he experienced as a minor, recalling how his own pastor blamed him as the victim. You'll hear that in this conversation. It is preposterous. And I think I even used the word preposterous. Not a word I use every day, but certainly fit in this scenario. I mean, blaming the victim of child sexual abuse is something that I think should lead to imprisonment. He was also unsupported by his family at the time. But as he's going through the writing process, he is got the full support of his wife, and he armed himself with the power of forgiveness. And with those two things, he was able to produce something that will help other abuse survivors, and particularly those who were abused in a religious setting. So please remember that my goal with Uncorking a Story is to make you a better writer, to help make you a better writer. And my advice for you today is to really reflect on your intent as you approach any writing project, whether it's a blog post or a short story or a novel or a memoir. Make sure that your intent is rooted in something positive and your writing will flow better. and you just might find some healing through the writing process. That is my lesson for today. Now, let's uncork Justin Woodbury's story. Justin Woodbury was raised on a small farm out in the country on the west side of Ann Arbor, Michigan. A child survivor of church abuse, Justin began advocating for victims of abuse after he held his son in his arms for the first time and realized the weight of responsibility he would have as a father. Since then, Justin has made it his life's mission to speak out against abuse in all forms and to be a voice for victims, especially those who were abused in a religious setting. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about his life and new book, Sheltered But Not Protected, Learning to Love, Forgive, and Heal After Emotional and Sexual Abuse. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Justin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Justin, I'm happy to have you here. And I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
So, when you were reading that bio of me, I think the story begins when I really was holding my son Jackson in my arms for the first time, looking down at him and feeling this overwhelming weight of responsibility to look out for him, to protect him, to provide for him. And I don't know that I thought at that point, man, I need to write a book. But that was what got me talking more about my past and things that I wouldn't do to be able to make sure that he was protected. And as I talked more and more about it to my wife, she actually was the one that suggested that I write a book. I don't have a background in writing. In fact, I think I probably didn't enjoy writing in school. It wasn't my favorite thing at all, but I had a story to tell and I needed to tell it.
So how did you start off this project? Did you just start by writing chapter one, or what kind of work went into setting up what would eventually become this book?
Yeah, for sure. So it was a lot of it was based off of just conversations that I would have with my wife and her reaction. So we were brought up in similar environments, very strict, independent, fundamental Baptist churches. So we would kind of compare stories as we would get to know each other. And her reaction to a lot of my stories told me that I grew up very unique, even more so than she did. And so one day, after my son was born, she's like, "You should write a book." And so I started thinking about it, and I decided, you know what, I am going to write a book. The process really was I sat down and started writing things that I could remember. And I brainstormed, wrote a bunch of ideas, and then I split those ideas into chapters. And then I just started writing the easiest chapters first. And when I say easiest, the ones that were not as hard to write based off of the trauma that I had experienced growing up. So I tackled all the easiest ones first, and then slowly started unpacking some of the more difficult chapters. And so I don't even know if that's the right way to write, but that's the way I did it.
Well, for something like this, I don't think there's a wrong way to tell such a personal story. I'm curious, as you sort of started digging in, it sounds like you were trying to tackle the easy stuff first. Maybe it's the surface level stuff. But as you start getting deeper into kind of what happened to you, what was that like for you personally? I mean, did you wrestle with that? Were you re-experiencing that trauma, or was this somewhat therapeutic for you?
Yeah, it was. So I knew sitting down and writing this book could have two possible outcomes. One is I could just get all my thoughts out on paper. I could publish this book. I was angry at the time when I wrote the book. Like I said, looking down in my son's arms, realizing this weight of responsibility also made me realize that I was not protected growing up. I mean, the name of the book is Sheltered But Not Protected. So looking down on my son's arms, realizing that I had not been protected like I wanted to protect my son, it made me angry. And so the beginning of me writing the book was out of anger, or the decision to write the book was out of anger. But I didn't want to actually sit down and write the book out of anger. And so I would sit down before I wrote each chapter and ask myself a series of questions, including have you forgiven the people involved in this book? And it was pretty easy for most of the chapters. What had happened was in my past, and there was a lot of mistakes made, but I think probably good people that just made bad mistakes. And then there's this one chapter that was my sexual abuse, and my abuser who was involved She was not a good person. I think she was an evil person, and so struggling with feelings of hatred, anger, bitterness, just really dark feelings. And so when I sat down to try to write that chapter, I couldn't, and because I hadn't come to this place of forgiveness. And I know forgiveness is such a hard topic to talk about, but my favorite definition of forgiveness is to set a prisoner free, only to realize that you yourself you were that prisoner. And so before I had come to that place, I couldn't write the chapter. And so I spent months, having this internal fight and reliving the abuse, and waking up in the middle of the night with nightmares and different things like that. And so that was traumatic. But when I finally broke through and came to the other side of that, it was very therapeutic. And I would say that the writing of the book as in whole was very therapeutic. Just being able to put my thoughts down on paper, and wanting to approach it from a balanced point of view forced me to see the good that I had in my childhood as well as some of the bad. So yes, to answer your question, it was very therapeutic for me to write.
Yeah, I mean, coming at a subject like this, I think it's natural to write it, to think about writing out of anger. Like, I'm going to write this and I'm going to get back at this person or this group of people who did me wrong.
Yeah.
But when you write from that intent, I think it's it can wind up being counterproductive, because I think it might be a short-term feeling of release.
That's right.
But then things can kind of go off the rails really quick. Whereas writing from the point of view of, hey, my intent here is to share my story to help other people who may have gone through something similar. Well, that's such a different intention. You're still telling the same story.
Yeah.
But coming at it from a different intent, which, could make you more motivated to keep writing.
Yes.
To kind of keep going and almost kind of keep discovering maybe some of the silver linings that these terrible events in your past. And I know it's cliched to say, hey, find the silver lining from some tragedy. But was there a point where you could think about, or did you come to a point where you said, you know what, sure, certainly this is something that happened to me, but really this is something that happened for me, and this is what I've learned from these events, and maybe it was to set you up to make you a better father. I mean, if the spark of this book is you holding your son in your arms and saying, wow, I need to tell this story, I mean, maybe that's what, maybe that's one of those silver linings. I don't want to overstep my boundaries here as a podcast host, but yeah. I'm just curious as if you ever thought about it like that.
No, that's an excellent observation. And I think when I started out the journey, when I made the decision to write the book, it was to let everybody know what happened to me. By the time the book was published, it was definitely the latter, what you said. It was something that happened for me. And one of the biggest paradigm shifts that I had was when I was talking to somebody from my past about the book, and they said, well, I'm just curious, have you taken responsibility for your part in the abuse that happened to you? And what they meant by that was not responsibility, but blame. Have you taken blame? Have you accepted the blame for what was considered an extramarital affair? Even though I was not married at the time, I was a minor, and my abuser was a woman in her 30s. The blame back then was scored 49% to 51%, 51% being on the abuser, 49% being on me. And so that was how the blame was scored. And so when this person from my past asked me, have you accepted blame? Have you accepted the responsibility for that? It threw me, because at the time I was struggling with blame and everything like that. But I think the best way to describe it is yes. By the time I wrote the email to the publisher and said go, I had accepted responsibility. And what I mean by that is I wrote a book about it. And so, I think it was George Bush or Ronald Reagan that said, once you accept responsibility for anything in your life or everything in your life, you have the ability to change anything in your life. And so what responsibility looked like for me was writing a book, was starting a channel on Facebook advocating for other victims of abuse, was exactly what you said, bringing my kids up in a much safer environment with the wool not pulled over my eyes, not my head not in the sand when it comes to my kids playing. Not that I'm a perfect parent, Mike, but just this ability to be more vigilant on behalf of my kids. And so all those to me were taking the responsibility without taking the blame. And so in that sense, this happened for me. And by the time the book was published, that's exactly how I felt. This didn't happen to me, it happened for me.
And welcome back to Uncorking a Story. We are talking with Justin Woodbury. Justin, I'm curious about the book and the reception of your book so far. What did those closest of you who have read the book or had a chance to read the book, what has their reaction been to you sharing your story like this?
You know, it's interesting. I just came back literally before I hopped on this podcast. I was out to lunch with my sister. We share the exact same birthday, 2 years apart. And so we're out for our birthday lunch because our birthday was earlier this week. And I found out that she has not even read the book yet. And the reason why is because she said the thought of reading it and hearing about in detail the details of the abuse and the trauma that I experienced, she says, I just don't know if I'm ready to hear that because it's so sad to me. And so she's not read it. My parents, who are front and center in the book, they were the ones that I guess that they sheltered me but didn't protect me. I have a solid relationship with my parents. I talk to them almost on a daily basis. They were nervous when I told them I was writing a book because they know that there are mistakes made, just like every parent makes a mistake, and they were nervous that I was going to put them in a bad light. And so I was somewhat disappointed with that response because I thought, man, if there's something that people can learn from your mistakes, then you should be willing to let it be put out there. But to answer your question, they've been supportive. They've read the book. We don't talk about it a lot, but that's my immediate family. Of course, my wife was very supportive. She wrote the foreword for the book. I have lost probably 75% of my friends growing up because they are still in what I would call a cult. The Independent Fundamental Baptist movement is a cult or cultish. And so they are still very much in that. And so even though I didn't blast all churches, I just blasted churches that allowed children to be susceptible to abuse. Churches don't like to hear that. Churches, the Baptist church can rip on the Catholic church and point out the Mormon church for abuse, but the minute someone talks about the Baptist church, they get really defensive and stuff. So any close family or close friends growing up, I really don't have anymore. I mean, there's a group that I'm still close with, but that was the reactions.
Yeah. What's your experience or relationship now, if any, with some kind of organized religion?
My experience is I hate organized religion, but I still have a relationship with God, and we go to a church. But I don't like organized religion. I think that when you get man involved, there's always a selfish motive, and it can always get twisted and screwed up. And so we have found a church that I think has a good balance. They have a good program in place for the children, where I feel like I can drop my 7-year-old daughter and my 9-year-old autistic son, that if something did happen to him, he wouldn't even be able to tell us because he has speech apraxia. He can't talk. So my son being nonverbal, he couldn't even tell us even if something bad did happen to him. And so we've searched high and low for a church where we feel very comfortable, and I don't even want to say comfortable because we don't feel comfortable at all. I mean, it's not like we're always looking for something bad, but we've learned that the woman who abused me was a faithful church member. She wore long dresses and she was in the choir and stuff. I mean, she was a model church goer. And so whereas some people think that abusers look like Hannibal Lecter, I think abusers look like, my closest friends and family members. And so it's to say we're comfortable dropping our kids off. We've just gotten to the point where we just keep an eye on it all the time. We're never necessarily comfortable, but we found a place where we call a church home, and it's a non-denominational church, and we attend usually on Sundays. So I think it goes too far, and I don't mean to be cliche, but I think you can throw the baby out with the bathwater and just reject God altogether, and we have not done that. But I have a love-hate relationship with religion for sure, organized religion.
I know you mentioned, some statistics earlier, like 51%, of the blame was hers and 49 was yours. I mean, was that like, did some tribunal or legal institution come up with that? And how did they base that? Because to me, it sounds a little preposterous that you as a minor could be responsible at all for being abused by somebody, that much older than you.
Yeah. It was my pastor who scored the blame. And in our church, he was he was the tribunal. His word went. I mean, it was whatever he said goes. So, the abuse started when I was 13. It was my mom's best friend. She was in her 30s, a woman, married, had 4 kids. And it started, she started grooming me when I was 13. I didn't find that out until I was older. But the sexual abuse began when I was a junior in high school, still a minor. And the reason my pastor scored it like that, and by the way, after the abuse was done and over with, and the church finally found out about it, as a mandated reporter, my pastor was supposed to go to the police and turn this woman in. And, I talk about this in my book too. Not only was there this sexual abuse going on, but in the middle of it, she started conspiring with me to kill her husband because she wanted her and I to be together. And our church didn't believe in divorce and remarriage. And so the only way in her mind for us to be together is if her husband died. And so there's a conspiracy there. So my pastor should have gone to the police. My parents should have gone to the police. I think they failed me there, but they didn't. It was pushed under the carpet. It was hidden. But when I did go to my pastor about it, the reason he scored it like that is because there's a story, and I don't know how familiar you are with the Bible, but there's a story in the Old Testament of the Bible where an older woman came on to a younger man, and the man ran. His name was Joseph. The man ran out of the woman's house. He left his cloak or his garment in her hands because she wouldn't let go of his coat. So he like took it off and ran out naked out of the house. And that's how much he was fleeing this temptation of this fornication or whatever. And so my pastor said, you were not a Joseph. You did not run. You let this happen to you. And for that reason, you are 49% to blame.
I mean, again, I didn't grow up in the same environment you grew up in, but I do know abuse when I hear it, and I think he's as liable for not reporting. I mean, to me, it's criminal. And this woman, she's not just, I mean, she clearly is a predator, but
yes,
she's clearly got some mental problems too. If she's thinking about killing her husband, so you and she could be together. That reeks to me of some severe mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Agreed and agreed. My pastor was absolutely responsible in playing a part. And the other part, and I talk about this in my book too, is I never received counseling, Mike. So, from the time they found out until I started writing my book, the only extent of counseling that I received was to make sure that I was truly sorry for what I had done. I had to meet with this woman's husband and read him a letter that I had pre-written that my pastor had to approve, apologizing to him for stealing his wife. And she had to meet with my parents and apologize to them for her part in it as well. But it was it was just step by step, to make sure that I was restored back into the church environment. But there was no counseling to make sure I was okay and not messed up from all that had happened. So I mean, if you want to write a book about all the things to not do, that's why that's part of the
Well, I
reason I
mean,
wrote the book.
what he's
Because
doing is covering his ass. I mean, that's pardon
yes,
the expression, but that's
yes,
that's what's happening.
absolutely.
I have to ask, and I don't know if you address this in the book or not, but when you're sitting down talking to that woman's husband, I mean, what's that like? I mean, what is that experience like?
It was so shameful. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt so much shame because I'm sitting in the pastor's office. Like I said, he had to approve the letter. I think he even made edits to it. And so he approved it, and then I rewrote it, or he edited it, I rewrote it, he approved it. And so I'm sitting there with this letter, and he comes into the office. He was so angry at me. I'll never forget it. He came in, and my pastor tried to get him to sit down, and he's like, no, I'm good. I'll keep standing. And he was just standing, just looking at me. And so I read the letter to him, and I'll never forget. He's like, Justin, I'm praying for you because you're sick, or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact thing. And then he walked out, and that was the end of it. And and it's not funny, but I wound up graduating from college and becoming a music director and teaching at a local Christian school. And when I did that, her name was Carolyn. I talk about her in the book, but her name was Carolyn. She and her husband, well, actually, she enrolled her oldest son in my choir. And so I still had to see her and her husband face to face. And you talk about the feeling of shame. Every time I saw him, it was just these feelings of shame, and it was just a messed up situation. But it was not fun talking to him at all. I mean, the whole thing was horrible.
How long between all this going down, you having that meeting, with the pasteurized letter that you had written and your pastor had edited? How long between when that goes down and you like finally leaving this? I'll use the word you use, cult.
Yeah. So I was 18 when I had to read that letter, and I did not leave that cult until I was 29. So 11 years.
What was the final straw that had you leave? I mean, if it wasn't all of that, was there something bigger that happened, or was your health in jeopardy because you've been carrying this around for so long?
My health was definitely in jeopardy. That's not why I left. Strangely enough, I graduated from college and came back to be the music director of that same church that I had grown up in, underneath that same pastor that had scored that blame 49% to 51%. And for the next, and as you can imagine, this guy was a sick person too, the pastor. I talk about it in my book, but he had some serious problems, and he was an abuser himself, just emotional and mental and psychological abusive. And so I came back. I was the music director. I fell in love with the assistant pastors, one of the other pastor's daughters, and because of my reputation, because of my background, that 49-51%, background, this guy wanted nothing to do with me for his daughter. And so she and I sneaked around, and I know this sounds ridiculous because I was 27, she was in her 20s at the time, but we sneaked around and had a secret relationship behind everyone's back. And so when it was finally found out that two consenting adults were sneaking behind their parents' backs in their mid-20s, when it finally came out that happened, they actually did decide to make that public, even though they hid the other stuff and didn't report it to the police. And there's nothing to report to the police with my situation when I was in my later 20s. But we had to go before the church and confess having a secret affair, and all sorts of stuff. And at that point, I was ashamed out of the church, and I moved from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Colorado, where I live now. But had that not had happened the way it went down, I probably would still be in it today, because that's the power of a cult. You don't even realize it's a cult. It took me years to come out and say I grew up in a cult.
Wow. Are your parents still part of the same cult/community?
They are.
I imagine.
I mean, they've moved from Ann Arbor, but the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church is all over. So they moved from one cult church to now they're in another cultist church.
Is this pastor still around? The guy who you were kind of under back in those days?
He is. He's retired now, but he's around. He goes to the same church in Ann Arbor.
Did anyone there try and come after you when maybe they heard that this book was being written?
A little bit, but not all pastors, and I don't want to broad brush pastors or even churches, but a lot of times they're cowards. They'll come down on church members and women and children a lot, but they're cowards when it comes to other stuff. So, I consulted with lawyers before I wrote the book, and they said that, in order to prove defamation or whatever, there's all these different rules that have to be met. And so when I told the guy what I was going to write about, he's like, you're probably safe. If you want to be on the safe side, change the names in the book. So I did that, except for Carolyn's name. At the time when I wrote the book, I had experienced so much healing that I didn't feel like it was inappropriate to use her name. But I changed all the other names. And so, yeah, I got some threatening letters from some pastors, a lot of gossip, a lot of slander about me, but not as much as you might think. I think the talk was a lot stronger behind my back instead of to my face, but not a lot of it.
Yeah. What's the main message you want a reader to take away? Having read this book, Justin, what's the main theme you're hoping a reader will take away?
Well, I wrote it with a specific kind of niche, or two specific niche. Number one, people that have been abused in churches, and secondly, probably men that have been sexually abused. And when it comes to the abuse in churches, I really want. I mean, the people who are the angriest that I wrote the book are probably the ones that need to read it the most, because there's just not good systems in place in a lot of churches to protect children from abusers. And I like to say that churches like the one I grew up in and other churches, they're a predator's playground, because you can walk into a church, you can wear a suit and tie and carry a big King James Version Bible, and you if you look the part, you must be the part. If you talk the talk, you must walk the walk, or whatever. And so, before you know it, you're teaching Sunday school to little kids. And so predators love the opportunity to go in and volunteer in a ministry where there's little kids, and then they abuse children. That's what happened to me, and that's what happened. The stories, Mike, that I heard from people even growing up with that I had no idea. I found out their parents were abusing them, all their Sunday school teachers were abusing them. Just heartbreaking. And so it's a wake-up call if churches would read the book and just think twice about it. And what I said about, my abuser was a lady in her mid-30s that was the first one at the altar when there was an altar call. She was in the choir. She was in the nursery. She wore the long dresses. And so another thing I would want people to get is it's not the person that you probably suspect that's an abuser. It's probably the one that you least suspect. So in that sense, that's one point. The other point is, I am not an anomaly for being a survivor, whatever you want to call it, of male sexual abuse. The statistics are higher when it comes to women, but there are a lot of men out there that are survivors of male sexual abuse. But I am an anomaly for telling my story. There's not a lot of men who are willing to get on podcasts or to write and publish a book. And the reason why is because it's not cool. I have been called so many. I've been ridiculed more by the world than I have by the church, and been called a pansy and a buttercup and stuff, just making fun of me because if you watch the movies like American Pie and Stifler's Mom, there's this Hollywood, I think, has sensationalized men having sex with older women or stuff like that. I mean, if the roles were reversed, if a woman, a young girl, had sex with an older man, everyone sees that as clear abuse. It's not the same when it's reversed. And so I think another point I would drive across is, and there's been so many men that have reached out and said, "Me too." Now they won't say it in public, but they'll say it behind closed doors. And I think that we need to come far as a society to recognize that it's not different. It hurts. I'm a living example of someone who went through living hell for years, and destroyed my body, almost destroyed my marriage as a result of sexual abuse. And so it does hurt. It's not cool. It's not the male sexual rite to passage. It's a horrible thing. And men need to be able to realize that. And I think we as a society need to get a little, I love the Me Too movement, right? I think that we've come a long way when it comes to believing women survivors. I think we're way in the dark ages when it comes to male survivors. And I think good things are happening there, but I guess those would be 2 points I'd want to drive across.
What do you think led to your healing the most? I mean, was it coming to acceptance and forgiveness? Was it writing this book? Was it a combination of things? I mean, if you were to give somebody some advice saying, hey, you know what, Justin, this happened to me as well. I'm a wreck. My marriage is in jeopardy. My career is, spiraling because it's all kind of coming to an head. There's past trauma, PTSD. What's the best piece of advice you could give somebody who comes to you and says these things?
Yeah. Counseling helped, but I would say the 3 things. 1, writing the book. 2, coming to a place of forgiveness or letting go or whatever, because I know forgiveness, there's so many things around that. I hate to even say the word, but writing the book was therapeutic. Experiencing forgiveness was therapeutic. I would say the last thing, and I don't know if this is something that people control, is having a supportive spouse. My wife had good reason to walk away from our marriage when we were younger because she was convinced that I did not love her. She would approach me and try to initiate romance, sexual, whatever, and I would push her away because of I would have PTSD from what had happened when I was a young teenager, and she experienced rejection and hurt, and she came alongside me and was in the arena with me, fighting alongside of me, trying to help me heal from it. And that's something I didn't even know I needed until I was able to look on the other side of it and say, wow, having a supportive spouse that fought for us probably was the biggest thing, and the biggest thing out of my control. I didn't choose that. It just happened that way, but that was huge for me.
Yeah, that's let's make her number one in your story.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
because had you not had that, because you also had a motivation to kind of get better, because I'm sure you didn't want
Yeah.
your marriage to end or continue to suffer. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's right.
yeah, wow. Thank you so much for sharing all these deep and personal things with me, Justin. I know you did, of course, share them in your book, Sheltered But Not Protected: Learning to Love, Forgive, and Heal After Emotional and Sexual Abuse. Justin, where can people pick up your book?
Easiest place is on Amazon. I mean, it's in Barnes and Noble. It's in Walmart. It's even on eBay now. I think people have read it and now want to resell it. But it's on Amazon's the best place. Just Google "Shelter But Not Protected" and Amazon's the first link that shows up.
Sure. And I know you mentioned having a podcast before. What can you share with us about the podcast, and where can people find it?
Yeah, so I have 2 podcasts going on currently. One is a work podcast. I work in the marketing department at a financial company, and I interview other financial advisors, and that's called Advisors Unscripted. But the one I'm working on now is actually my best friend growing up read my book, and he and I started a mini podcast, and we haven't published it yet, but it's just called Shelter But Not Protected Unscripted. And that's just where he was with me during a lot of what happened, and we just kind of talk about the different chapters, but we haven't put that out quite yet. So
Sure. All right. Well, we'll be on the lookout for that. And if people want to learn more about you, Justin, do you have a website? Are you active on any social media? Can you share some handles with us?
yeah, so at Shelter But Not Protected is my handles on all the social media. I'm mostly active on Facebook, but sometimes Instagram. And then I do have a website, shelteredbutnotprotected.com. And then my email address is justin@shelterednotprotected.com. So I took the but out there to make it shorter. It's just justin@shelterednotprotected.com.
All right, Justin, I will put all of that in our show notes so people can find you easily, as well as links to where to buy the book. Justin, thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.